So PCI Media is birthed. It has a methodology that works. Um, what's interesting to me when I first got involved, partly because my brother-in-law had a love for radio growing
Mhm.
up in England, and a method, and you guys discovered that radio was a very effective medium, and maybe the media in most countries, especially developing countries. They didn't have television in those days. Certainly didn't have the internet or cell phones.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really fascinating. Still today, the majority of our work is in radio. It's on the radio. This is how we reach people. And I often get the question, people say, well, why don't you do work in television? And we do some television work. We have a few productions on the air in different countries now, but radio remains the number one way to reach people around the world. And even in places where the media market is quite saturated, as it is in the United States, radio remains so popular. And one of the innovations that I think has really added to the power of the Sabito method, which is the method that PCI Media bases all of our entertainment education productions on, is the ability to create the space for dialogue. And this really allows us to really leverage the theories of Albert Bandura, because not only do we have cognitive learning theory, which is all about social modeling and like tapping into people's archetypes and existing schema, but we also are able to leverage what's called social learning theory, which is that people learn better if they're able to discuss and either participate in actively or by listening. So this is something really interesting, Rick. So when our radio dramas air, we always have a facilitated dialogue directly following. So if you call into the radio show and you say, I want to talk about what, Maria's boyfriend did, that was so wrong, and I have a question about what Maria can do to advocate for herself. If I'm listening to the conversation, my brain activates as if I have asked the question.
Mm.
I am part of the conversation. And so you're able to really scale this sort of negotiation of new information, asking questions, sharing new insights in a way that is even more powerful in some ways than what happened exactly with Simplemente Maria, because there wasn't even that sort of embedded support for people to do that in a structured way. So it's quite powerful.
So take me through it. Let's take an example. Maybe you could choose one project you're working on, and give us a feel for what would it look like to go from scratch with nothing, and how you would work with teams in the host country.
Mhm.
And what I think is so interesting about our model is that we empower the community to create these.
Yeah,
We don't create them; they create them, but we teach them how to.
yeah.
Walk us through an example maybe of a project you've done in which you've applied the methodology, and what would it look like on the ground as it's carried out and applied and implemented?
Mhm. So I would love to take you to Mozambique, which is a country of almost 40 million people. So just a lot of lovely Mozambicans, but also a country that deals with some really dire challenges: malnutrition, uh, sexual and reproductive health, access for women, violence against women. So, and also the effects of climate change. Mozambique's been hit by two severe cyclones in the last 2 years, and these storms, like everywhere, are growing in frequency and severity. So, we are working there with partners. As you pointed out, we always work with local partners. In this case, our major local partners are UNICEF Mozambique, at the Mozambican Ministry of Health, Radio Mozambique, which is the national radio network, but then also the Mozambican network of community radios. So this gives us great reach and coverage into the country. So all of our work is grounded in research. So the work in Mozambique is really focused on health outcomes primarily for the Mozambican population. So we work with health researchers, health scientists to figure out what do people need to know, right? Like about nutrition, about sexual and reproductive health. But as we talked about before, because of the low literacy levels, it's really important to then translate that into the methodology of the Sabito method. And the way that we do that is we host huge design workshops, which make me think a lot of your Story Jam work as I've experienced it, where diverse set of stakeholders come together, experts, community members, radio hosts, and we all really delve into the issue set, come up with a messaging framework, and then design compelling, locally resonant characters. It's character-based work, right? The positive character, the transitional character, the negative character that will carry the story. And if I can just go back here, because I didn't answer this part of the question earlier, gets to this work around archetypes with Bandura's work. That these characters really need to be able to encompass and hold the imagination of people. So they really need to be like recognizable symbolic figures for the local community. So characters that would resonate with you or me are not necessarily the kind of characters that would resonate with the community in Mozambique. So it is critical that we are really listening to the people in the room and incorporating their input as this design work is done.
So fascinating. So we start off in that workshop. You assemble a team of creative people there who end up writing the dramas, right?
Yes.
And but then they send them to you, to your team in New York.
Yep.
To assess and be sure that they're hitting all the right notes.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
so there's a translation. They have to be translated. I don't know what's the primary language, or there are multiple languages in Mozambique.
Right. This is so beautiful. So the primary language in Mozambique is Portuguese. So, however, there are 21 other local languages. Yesterday was International Mother Tongue Day. And I'm a big fan of understanding that the mother tongue is the language of learning. Like if you can communicate to somebody in the way that their mother speaks to them, you're hitting a spot that's going to get you really far.
Mm-hmm.
So we produce the radio drama in Mozambique, but we also produce other complementary content in the local languages to facilitate access to the story and the characters and the learning. So, we do a lot of creative advising to the writers, actors, and directors to make sure the methodology is followed strongly, to make sure that the messaging is right. So we do want to make sure that we're providing people with accurate information that they can use that's actionable. But we also want to make sure that we are entertaining them. This is our service to them, is to really believe in and lean into the power of story to be the vehicle to make all of this work.
Yeah, because if it doesn't entertain, you're going to lose your audience, and they will not engage. So
Exactly.
yeah. Now there are other pieces that you wrap around the drama.
Mm-hmm.
Because you to really enhance it. So you do things. Tell us a little more about what you do, for example, with DJs, the radio hosts, and then, as I understand, you're doing work in hair salons in Mozambique. So that's a creative kind of combination. Tell us how you go about bringing together these other pieces that amplify the messaging in the drama.
So we have a saying at PCI Media that content is only good when it leads to conversation.
Mm.
And Peter Vaughan, who is a well-known researcher in the field of entertainment education, likes to say that changes in conversation are the first behavior change. So if you think about the continuum of change, if people begin to speak differently about something, you can see them on the path to behaving differently about, a particular issue. So this is why the work primarily, first and foremost, with radio DJs and radio producers is so important, because the work that we're doing with them is really helping them to develop the capacity to facilitate conversation that is non-judgmental but accurate around these issues. So for example, in Mozambique, one of the storylines in Oro Negro, which is the radio drama, is about reduction in early marriage. And when these storylines began to run, callers were calling into the radio station and saying, why is it that when I listen to this radio show, people are saying that it is suggesting that our daughter should not be married, which was not the suggestion. So one way to handle this conversation would have been like, well, you totally misunderstood the story and that's not the suggestion. Thank you very much for calling. But really, you want to create that space for dialogue where you're inquisitive, where you're asking questions and seeking to understand the audience's perspective. And it turns out in a lot of these local languages, conceptually, and this was so fascinating to me, Rick, there's no concept of early marriage. There's either marriage or not, and marriage is desirable. So there was not even a conversation about how early is too early. It just had never been a conversation. So then through this dialogue, it introduces the idea that the age at which your daughter is married, so yes, you do want your daughter to be married, and that's commendable, but the age at which she is married should also factor into the conversation, which was an innovation in the way of thinking, right? If we go back to Simplemente Maria, oh, I can go to literacy classes. I can do that now, even though my life has turned out, what I see as horribly, I can do something different. Oh my goodness, I can. And so using the story to really open the aperture of possibility for people is really powerful. And the call-in shows allow the radio DJs to really listen to people and bring them along, on this learning journey.
Wow. And then, of course, as I understand it, in their culture, almost like a community center is the hair salon.
Yes.
And that's where people gather to not just to get their hair done, but to connect and to talk and to share. And you're training the professionals in those salons in how
Yeah.
to have the conversations as well, correct?
Correct. And of course, providing content. Rick, I don't know. I've spent a lot of hours of my life in hair salons. And when the hair salon idea first surfaced, there was some question about if people would be in the hair salons long enough to have these conversations. Like we keep people for an hour or so on the radio. And I said, oh, don't worry. I've spent many a day where I've spent half a day or more in a hair salon. You've seen my hair dues. So, it can take a while, which makes it a great setting.
Of course.
Listen to a little bit of drama, listen to a radio spot, have some conversation with a trusted person. So basically it's about finding all of the spaces where we can facilitate these conversations. So communities of faith are another place, schools are another place. And since we have this content, now it's about how can we get it into the spaces where people can have these conversations for change.